We're calling all writers, storytellers, and creators of tales of the paranormal and supernatural. Do you have a spine-tingling story that's too chilling to keep to yourself? If the answer is yes, then wherever you are in the world, the Haunted UK Fiction Podcast wants to hear from you. Whether you're a published author, an aspiring writer, or someone with a natural gift for storytelling, this is your chance to share your work with a global audience of listeners who crave the eerie, the unexplained, the otherworldly. We're looking for original fictional short stories or novellas with strong paranormal or supernatural themes. Your stories can be suspenseful, mysterious, atmospheric, terrifying, thought-provoking, even darkly magical. If your story is selected, we'll professionally narrate, record, mix, and master it into an audiobook-style format, then feature it on the show. You'll get a copy of the finished production to use however you like, and you'll retain full ownership of your work. There are no fees, no contracts, and no hidden jargon. Your story deserves to be heard. Whether it's a tale that's been haunting your notebook for years, or maybe something that you're finally ready to unleash, this is your chance to bring it to life. To submit your story for consideration, email us at hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. And don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at hauntedukfiction. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to Haunted UK Fiction, a sister podcast to The Haunted UK, which features original flash fiction, short stories and novellas with paranormal themes. All stories you will hear are written by a collection of talented writers, authors and storytellers, both independent and professional. In today's episode, we'll be reading Blasted Heath, a ghost story, which was sent in to us by Lewis Darley. Lewis is a writer, an illustrator and a videographer based in Nottingham. With short fiction, he always looks to combine the everyday with the strange and create unsettling stories with a sense of realism to them. Influences include Michelle Paver, Russell T. Davies, Daphne du Maurier, Danny Robbins, Benjamin Myers, Reece Shearsmith, Steve Pemberton, Blind Boy Boat Club, A.K. Blakemore, and Rosemary Timperley. Now, it's time to get comfortable, grab a little something to sip on, perhaps cuddle up under a blanket to help offset the chills coming your way. And let's dive into the story. The career progression of an actor of a certain age in England was relatively easy to track. After several years in a prestigious drama school, you would play an inebriate role on the bill in the 90s before graduating into a semi-permanent slot on Holby City with the turn of the century. You might play a background character in an episode of Peep Show, or a dedicated stepdad in a series of adverts for home insurance. After 30-odd years of performing, Daniel Waters was more familiar than most about the nature of this cycle. Though aware that he had managed to sustain a living from his talents, a rarity in itself, He'd started to view the entire exercise as a tiresome relative chore. Despite his years of dedication, he has never managed to reach the stratospheric heights of recognition in the United States. Instead, he was the undisputed king of the Sunday night ITV crime drama, successful enough to live comfortably, but not wealthy enough to be too selective about the sort of roles he was offered. Still, there were whispers of a BAFTA for his performance in the recent series of Maidenhead, another detective show where he adopted a regional accent, and he was at least grateful that his career had pivoted back to the familiar boards of a serious stage show, rather than the calling of a matinee pantomime. The show was an RSC production of Macbeth, as prestigious as it got. His stunt casting as the titular lead was guaranteed to secure full seats. Frances Moran, playing Lady Macbeth, was an old friend, having done her time playing an eager DI under his stewardship in a couple of series of Maidenhead some years previously. He was glad to have a friend accompanying him on this step of his career, especially as everyone else in the cast were completely unknown to him, either chameleon veterans of stagecraft or fresh, bright faces selected straight from drama school. Daniel could see how keen they were, eager ambition behind wide eyes. They seemed to almost hero-worship him, something that had given him an advantage when playing an all-powerful king. None were aware of the more mundane realities of acting professionally for such a long amount of time. Daniel had to fight the urge to kick the ladder from beneath him, shake them by the shoulders, and encourage them to learn a useful trade, a career that would not disappoint them or grow into something they would resent. Daniel walked at the front of the stage without his costume, watching as the three young actresses playing the witches recited their lines. The director had dispensed with the black capes of the traditional medieval hags, and instead had them dressed in drab grey dresses in an attempt to distance her retelling from its normal setting. In his own costume fitting, Daniel had rolled his eyes. He'd dreamt of playing the role with all the expected regalia, a shining gold crown and fur-lined crimson robe. Instead, he wore a similarly unexciting grey tunic, his costume adorned with a crown of thorns when his character took the throne. He found the obvious symbolism muddled, and mourned his own preferred image of the play, where he would be dressed in a way that would serve to amplify his performance. The three witches were watching Dina, the movement coach, with a determined intensity. Dina was in her early 60s, but possessed an energy of someone far younger. Lithe and snake-like in her precise movements, she grew irritated at her charge's inability to immediately mirror her choreography. "This needs to be second nature," she said. "You need to be able to move and recite your lines simultaneously without even thinking. It needs to feel organic." To Daniel, this seemed a more arduous undertaking than Dina was expecting, like a drummer in a band singing the lyrics to a slightly different beat. He found it amusing watching the actresses flounder, but then caught himself suddenly aware that his presence in the rehearsal for this scene may be making them uncomfortable. Dina snapped at him. "You, whoever you are," she said, "you shouldn't be here." Daniel nearly rose to this deliberate attack on his ego, before realizing that, as the lead actor, there would be no way that Dina would have no idea who he was. He smiled and played along with a knowing deadpan. "I'm Macbeth," he said. Dina winced, and the witches widened their eyes in surprise. "It's not bad luck when you're saying the character's name," he said, "is it?" Dina huffed. "Personally, I wouldn't be tempting fate for my first lead performance in the RSC." Daniel grinned. "So you do know who I am," he said. "Be that as it may," Dina replied. "You're not in this scene, and I'm sure you've plenty of lines to be learning." In truth, Daniel had memorized the entire play in his head since his drama school days. Despite this, he left as he was asked, to allow the weird sisters to master their movements away from his observations. Frances Moran was sitting on the steps outside the theatre, enjoying a cigarette. She smiled as Daniel came to join her. Her face was thin and sharp, her hair styled in a way that pulled taut at her skin. This resulted in a vision of permanent alarm, something the director wanted for her monologues of guilt and anguish. "Here's trouble," she said. "Have you been making a nuisance of yourself?" Daniel shrugged. "Hardly," he said, "but I don't think Dina likes any outside interference as she's choreographing." "She's a viper, that woman," Francis said. "She's been an indispensable source of inspiration for myself to help me get into character." Daniel laughed, imagining Francis watching Dina overtly from the wings, mirroring every stress-induced facial twitch for her own performance. She stubbed out her cigarette on the stone steps. "Have you been finding everything?" she asked. Daniel appeared uncomfortable, as though aware his response may come across as petulant. "It's okay," he said. "Like, I know this is objectively a huge stepping stone moment of my career, but now it's actually here. I don't know. I feel a bit numb to the whole thing, I'll be honest." "I know what you mean," Francis said. "Maybe we'll start enjoying it when we're actually performing to a waiting public." "The costume isn't helping," Daniel said. "It's a grey pillowcase." "Oh, I know," Francis said. "I'm supposed to be one of the original femme fatales, and they've got me dressed in this androgynous shapeless shift, like I'm a sack of potatoes." "Unsex me indeed," Daniel said. "Huh. Well, quite," Francis replied. She glanced back at the towering theatre behind them. The sun was high in the sky, trapping both Francis and Daniel in the cool shape of its long shadow. "Have you managed to have any real conversations with the rest of the cast yet?" she asked. "Or are they still intimidated that they're in the same room as the great Daniel Waters?" "Sometimes, but it's slim pickings," Daniel said. "But most of them, they're so young." "Finn told me he'd grown up watching me in Maidenhead," she said. "Grown up? He's supposed to be playing Malcolm, for God's sake, the rightful King of Scotland, not some fanboy," Daniel offered. Francis laughed before stopping herself. Daniel had found recollections of playing a supporting player in an adaptation of A Christmas Carol in 1990. The smell of the rich varnished sets, the feel and weight of his costume. Perhaps, as Francis had suggested, he was being unkind. His co-star rose from the steps, wrapping herself up. "I'm getting cold. You coming inside?" she asked. "I'll be along in a minute," he said. "You go on." In truth, he wanted a moment of respite and silence to try and appreciate his surroundings and where he'd ended up after years of hard work. Standing in the shadows, he hoped for a feeling of pride for his achievements, or better still, humility. Nothing came. Daniel joined Francis inside, who was happily chatting with the rest of the cast. The overhead lights flickered above them. Some of the younger actors recoiled slightly, laughing nervously. "Just the lecky playing up," Daniel said. "What's the matter?" "They've been scaring themselves by telling ghost stories," said Francis. "Every old theatre has a ghost story," said one of the older actors, John, who was playing Banquo. "They're all pretty much the same. There's nothing in them." "There we go," Daniel said. "From our very own ghost, no less, so I imagine he's the expert." "All just superstition," Francis agreed. One of the three witches shook her head. "I've been chatting to the tech and scenic guys about it. None of them said that they were particularly superstitious, and yet they all agreed that there was a definitive presence. Have you heard the ghost story of the Old Vic?" "No," admitted Daniel. "Back in the day, when they could still hire kids to work as stagehands, there was a young boy who worked here as a scenic. God knows what play he was working on, but parts of the stage were decorated with these upright metal poles, all skeletal, like some kind of ribcage." Daniel was twiddling his thumbs, clearly bored, but the young witch continued her story, stop-starting as she remembered different essential elements of the tale. "Anyway, one day he's painting something high up in the background, up on a stepladder. It must have been an old rickety thing even then, because the weight of him buckles the hinge, and so he falls." She moved a pointed finger in an arc above her head and toward the ground, illustrating the severity of the descent. The witch smacked a flat palm against the floor, punctuating the inevitable. On to the metal poles, and he's skewered. He dies slowly, painfully, bleeding to death on this very stage. So, when does he come back? John asked. That's the thing. Almost immediately. The show continues anyway, despite his death, and the resulting performances are a disaster. Props go missing. Actors flub lines. The critics savage it. I've been in plays like that, Francis quipped. Never saw a ghost, mind. Yeah, but that's the thing, the witch countered. People do start to see him, as a spectre, puncture wounds sorted across his chest. The story finished. The witch leant back into her seat to allow for debate and discussion. John remained unconvinced. And when did this happen? He asked. I don't know, the witch admitted. Probably Victorian times. It's always Victorian, John exclaimed. You notice that these stories are never about someone who died in 2005. It's a load of nonsense. But the Scenics said the Scenics are pulling your leg. It's completely baseless, superstitious rubbish. Exactly, said Daniel, chiming in. Like this idea you have to say the Scottish play instead of Macbeth. Where the hell did that come from? To his surprise, the entire company of actors gasped as he said Macbeth, even the hardened veterans like Francis and John. This amused him. Oh, come off it, he said. It's an old wives' tale. You shouldn't mess with stuff like that, one of the young actors piped up. A 21-year-old playing the 12-year-old fiancé. Why not? Asked Daniel, genuinely perplexed. I don't know, the young actor replied. Maybe because the Scottish king was a real person? The real medieval King Macbeth of Scotland had little to no resemblance to the fictional Macbeth of the play. Shakespeare wrote it to stroke the ego of King James I, to say he descended from the right bloodline. Did none of you pay attention in English when you were doing your O-levels? I think they're called GCSEs now, Dan, Francis said. Daniel shot her a look, assessing the terrified eyes looking up at him. Some of the actors had even cupped their hands over their ears. I can't be arsed with this, said Daniel. I'm going back to my dressing room, but you have fun. With his door shut to his fellow actors, Daniel pored over the lines he already knew so well. He wasn't sure why the talk of theatre ghosts had irritated him so much. Maybe it was because it made the field of acting more exclusionary. His performative superstitiousness that made it easier to ostracize any newcomers not up to speed. This ritualistic revelling in the craft had never sat right with him. Acting was a job, methodical and dependent on hard work and practice as any other. Still, he recognized when his real emotions, positive or negative, could be cannibalized for a later performance. In this moment, his frustrations with the rest of the cast were being channeled into the scene where Macbeth sees a vision of Banquo's ghost at the dining table and chastises the surrounding lords and barons as if they had produced the apparition as some kind of cruel trick. Daniel listened to the hallway beyond his own dressing room and could hear nothing. His outburst had clearly dispersed the playful gathering. He began to feel guilty, aware that perhaps the pressures of this potentially career-defining performance was starting to get to him. He vowed to apologize to everyone the next time they all congregated, and not be as dismissive to the idea of Theatreland superstitions, no matter how much he disagreed with them. There was a gentle rapping on the door, which caused him to start. He reckoned it must be Francis, an old friend coming to check on him after he walked away, or a runner, summoning him to set for further rehearsals. The knocks on the door started to get louder as he walked towards it. I'm coming, he said, trying to hide the impatience in his tone, lest he lose his temper with anyone else he would be spending weeks working with. Grabbing the door handle, he opened the door, to find the corridor empty. The lights were switched off. He stared into complete, brilliant darkness. He scanned his surroundings for a couple of seconds, trying to locate the source of the noise. After nothing materialized, Daniel closed the door and sat himself back down. He looked at his reflection staring back at him, framed by the bulbs of the vanity mirror. He lamented his lack of enthusiasm for the part, despite its prestigious nature, and for his inability to connect with the rest of the cast, save for Francis. His actor's mindset highlighted that his own feelings of ostracization could be usefully repurposed for his performance of a solitary king, burdening immense guilt and responsibility. Bang! There was another knock on the door, louder this time. Daniel audibly helped, springing out of his seat, poised to face off against whatever unnatural threat would enter. Instead, a young runner rather timidly peered around the door, pale white and embarrassed for having made Daniel jump. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Waters. It's just that they're after you on set." His heart rate having returned to its normal steady pace, Daniel adopted a tone of concern to show that no damage had been done. "It's me who should be apologizing," he said. "The rest of the cast were sharing ghost stories earlier, and I'm afraid my imagination rather let me get carried away." He pulled a face and made an exaggerated action of shrugging his shoulders to show that he was harmless. "It's quite all right, Mr. Waters. It's an old building. You're bound to get a bit jumpy sometimes." Daniel was pleased that his fears were understood, and that he had a rational explanation for the earlier knocks. He followed the runner out from the corridor, towards the direction of the stage. "Was that you I heard earlier, then, knocking for the other actors?" Daniel asked. The runner frowned, a small crease appearing at the top of her nose. "You're the first person I've come to collect. I think everyone else is outside." Daniel was hurt that he'd been excluded from another social meeting with the cast, but put this down to him having stormed away from the previous one. The runner astutely noticed this and admirably tried to explain why he'd not been invited. "Miss Moran told them all it was best not to bother you for a bit," she explained. "She said you would probably have appreciated some space to learn your lines." Aware that he had been placated, Daniel was still grateful to the runner for trying to spare his pride. "So you heard some knocking then?" she asked, tactfully changing the subject. "Before I came to get you?" Daniel hesitated. "Probably just pipes," he said. "It's an old building," repeated the runner. He pressed further. "I imagine you don't scare too easily, working in an old place like this, weaving in and out of the shadows?" "Well, sometimes you hear things. Old stories. Things that go bump in the night." "Nah, it's all just settling, isn't it? Air pressure. It still gives you a scared mind, hearing a loud noise when you're not expecting it." Daniel felt smugly satisfied that the runner's swift dismissal of anything ghostly proved his own theory that the tech and scenic teams were simply pulling the legs of the young actors with tall tales. He thanked the runner for coming to collect him, before travelling the rest of the way to the stage, for another meeting with the show's director. Virginia Hardwick, a veteran director at the RSC, had an unconscious habit of stopping her sentences midway through, resolving them to herself internally. Such was her genius, Daniel often felt several steps behind her and would repeatedly ask her to reiterate her ideas. "Can you walk me through it again?" he said, conscious that this was rapidly becoming a catchphrase. Clearly, Virginia found it patiently impossible that her lead actor was struggling to see her vision, but would dutifully try to explain it as plainly as she could. "It really is quite simple, Daniel. The rest of the cast will be wearing black. So when Banquo's ghost appears at the end of the table, the lights will dim, and they will fade seamlessly into the background, leaving you alone." "And how's John going to appear?" Daniel asked. "A trapdoor?" Virginia shook her head. "Only John's shadow will appear on stage, so it just gives the impression of a ghost." It was a reading of the play that Daniel, ever the purist, did not especially care for. He preferred the idea that the ghosts were real, tangible beings rather than manifestations of his character's madness. He wanted to see John with pale face paints and sunken eyes, his costume shining under the stage lights with the glistening teardrops of fake blood. He was dismayed to learn, too, that once the rest of the cast disappeared into the background, they would leave the stage entirely, and the rest of their dialogue for the scene would be pre-recorded, played through stereo speakers. After years of working in television, Daniel had become reliant on reacting to the choices made by other actors to inform his own performance. This more sparse, abstract retelling was not necessarily playing to his strengths. Virginia was offering him the chance to do something most actors could only dream of: inhabit a completely solitary stage and show an eager audience the full extent of his talents. And it terrified him. Press night. Daniel was word perfect. Every action and intonation agreed with Virginia. His copy of the play was threadbare, filled with notes and observations on how to improve. Despite his earlier reservations, the final version of the play was, in his view, a masterpiece. Even the cumbersome movements of the weird sisters that he'd cringed at had transcended into something balletic and hypnotic. Still, he was unable to relax. "Just adrenaline," Frances had assured him. "You'll absolutely smash it, Daniel. Trust me." Some hours before the performance was due to start, Daniel decided to go for a walk to get some air. King Street in the winter still boasted an abundance of drunken revellers, people enjoying their work end-of-year parties, sinking pints bought on the company credit cards. Daniel had hoped that his beanie hat and turned-up collar would offer him a degree of anonymity, but inevitably, as was expected, he was stopped by a passer-by. "Sorry, I never do this," the woman began. She was in her early 20s, already a few drinks in. She behaved with an air of familiarity, as though she knew Daniel personally, something he'd gradually gotten used to after years in the public eye. "I loved you in Maidenhead," she began. "Is that why you're here? Are you filming?" "We don't film the next series until the new year," he said, "and we film most of it in Liverpool. I'm actually doing a play at the Old Vic." "Yeah? What's the play?" "Macbeth," he replied, imagining the shocked outrage of his peers. "The Scottish play." The woman made a face, unimpressed. "We did that at school," she said. "I thought it was as dull as shit." Daniel understood her reservations and felt embarrassed by his need for her continued interest. "It's one of the many failings of this country's education system," he said. "Shakespeare's supposed to be seen, not read. Reading it takes all the fun out of it." A small collection of the woman's friends exited the pub and began calling her to follow them to their next destination. "I really should go," apologized the woman, "but could I get a selfie with you?" Daniel complied, hoping the brief snapshot would not draw attention to him. The front camera flashed. Momentarily blinded, Daniel could only see the movement of shadows. Satisfied with her souvenir, the fan was already halfway down the street with the rest of her friends. "Nice meeting you," she called back. "Good luck with your play." The phrase registered with Daniel. He again pictured what the cast would say upon hearing "good luck," instead of the preferred "break a leg." After a swift circuit around the square, Daniel returned to his dressing room and began to put on his costume. It had become a second skin, a shorthand way for him to get into character. When he looked at himself, gone was the face of a recognizable actor, whose presence littered the television schedules with tired dramas and magazine show appearances. Daniel Waters had been replaced with the image of a king, coiled, gaunt and tight, his eyes alight with bloodthirsty purpose. He glanced at the time on his phone. It was still half an hour before he was due on stage. He would join in the pre-show rituals in a couple of minutes, show his face as the lead actor, and offer words of encouragement to the young performers. In the meantime, he thought it wouldn't hurt to take a few last cursory glances at his script. By now the words were etched in place, but reading the play again gave Daniel another jolt of confidence, secure that he knew the next lines perfectly even before he turned the pages. There was a knock on the door. It was rapid, coarse, breaking the stillness of the air. Daniel chose to ignore it, thinking on his earlier explanation of old pipes and shifting air pressure. He looked to the door only momentarily before returning his attention back to the script. The knock sounded again, more urgent and insistent this time. Daniel slammed the script down onto his dressing table, hoping the loud action would highlight his irritation. He knew full well he had time before curtain call, before he was expected to meet with the rest of the cast and director, to offer best wishes and break a legs before their first shared performance. For God's sake, he said to himself, what does it take to get a bit of peace and quiet around here? I'm only the bloody lead. He strode towards the door, agitated. He opened it with some force, to reveal nothing. And yet the knocking persisted. The darkness ahead of him mocked him, and he could feel an energy to it, a malignant, pulsing growth. Daniel stepped backwards in shock as the darkness followed him. It swallowed the light from the room, slowly and methodically. The individual bright bulbs of the framed vanity mirror dimmed into nothingness one at a time, with only the orange internal coils suggesting any warmth. Daniel was left in an oblivion. He stared ahead at the wall in the corridor. His breath cooled and condensed against the surface of the mirror. The darkness collected, growing, forming. Daniel shrank, his back sliding down the wall as a figure rose. It was the suggestion of a man, a silhouette, a shadow. The neck bent, arms broken, thin, jagged shapes protruding from the centre of the mass. Instruments of awful intention and consequence. Daniel could not speak. He hadn't the words to describe the experience, the sensation of the metallic chill in the air, the dryness in his throat. All that was left to him were the words of the bard, the phrases he had learned so rigidly. "Which of you have done this?" he whispered. The thin shapes that jutted from the form ahead of him pulsed and moved, and Daniel could only think of the weird sisters, how they'd learned to move as one fluid shifting shape. He closed his eyes and spoke, trying to find something, anything to cling on to and find comfort. "Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, or why, upon this blasted heath, you stop our way." Macbeth Review. Daniel Waters is a revelation in this bold reimagining of the Scottish play. 5 stars. Bristol Old Vic Theatre. Expectations were mixed earlier in the year when the RSC announced yet another modernised production of Macbeth. On one hand, it boasted the return of director Virginia Hardwicke after several years away, a once-in-a-generational talent who had heralded earlier masterful productions of Twelfth Night and The Taming of the Shrew in the last decade alone. On the other hand, it was marred by accusations of stunt casting, namely in its central leads, Maidenhead's Daniel Waters and Francis Moran, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth respectively. Happily, these earlier reservations have not hindered the production at all, and Hardwicke's interpretation brings to mind a nightmarish, expressionistic German silent film. The lighting and staging feels organic and dreamlike, doing away with the pomp and pageantry of rival productions. This is Shakespeare at its most stripped back. Sparse, skeletal, atmospheric, and crucially, accessible. Against all expectations, it is due to the effort of the two leads that Hardwicke's production shines. Frances Moran continues her streak of excellent stage performances. Her Lady Macbeth at once feels wounded and vulnerable, but barbed and venomous. The highest praise must be, however, reserved for Daniel Waters. Gamely shedding away his television tough guy image, Waters appears haunted throughout, gaunt, frightful, as though the character is discombobulated and disconnected from the terrible deeds he had enacted in his lust for power. It is a stunning, transformative performance, elevating Waters into an actor to watch, and marking an earned transition into an exciting new chapter of his career. At the Bristol Old Vic, until the 11th of February. That brings us to the end of this episode. We truly hope you enjoyed this ghostly theatrical tale. If you would like to hear more from Lewis Darley, you can find his work on both his website and his own audio fiction podcast series, Crooked and Strange. You can follow him on Instagram at Darley Makes Art. All links and contact information can be found in the show's notes. If you have an original story that would send a chill down our spines, and you would like to submit it for review, simply send it in to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. That's hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. Until next time, stay safe and take care.